Sharing your morning with us. Thank you, Ingrid, for remembering to record this meeting. We put a little extra time on our agenda this morning for welcome and introductions. Our agenda review should be pretty pro forma. I don't note any need to make adjustments there unless others in the group see a need to recommend an adjustment to the agenda, and then we can make that. Otherwise, I thought, well, Ingrid and I both thought it was Ingrid's good idea, so I won't take credit for it. She thought since we're still a group that is getting to know each other, that we could spend a little extra time with introductions. And that makes me think I should have conjured up an icebreaker question. I would ask who everybody's favorite teacher was, but then we'd all have to change our security questions. So we won't go there. But I will say that my favorite grade, or one of my favorite grades, was third grade, which is, my daughter is in third grade now. And I had a great teacher. It was a great year. Like, the power of reading was kind of like opening up, and I was devouring books. And yeah, Ticonderoga Elementary School was a great place to be in whatever that long ago year was, 1985. So there, do the math. Um, but yeah, maybe we can just take a lead from that, or if there's anything else you would like to share with the group in terms of updates. We do have a little roundtable portion at the end of the meeting. But with that, I will pass it off to you, Leah, and then we can sort of go around the room.
Thanks, Sadie. Good morning, everyone. Leah Rausch. I'm a planner with the City of Eugene. I've been on CIC for a long time now. I forget how many years. Long enough that I've forgotten. My favorite grade, is that what you're thinking is the icebreaker? I might spin it to like a favorite memory from school growing up, as we're in back to school season. This is maybe really nerdy, but the thing that comes to mind is the first time I got to do like my own research project. And I remember researching monarch butterflies and their migration patterns, and just thinking that was the coolest thing ever. I think like fifth grade, we did our like first big research project on our own and got to present on what we learned. So that's the thing that comes to mind for me. I will popcorn it to Maria.
Hi, good morning. My name is Maria Sippen. I'm in Portland, Oregon. I'm an elected official, Mitch Green, Portland City Council. I'm his chief of staff. I have lots of good memories from elementary school. I think one of them was when I learned about the Mayan civilization and all of their scientific and technological advances. I had never been so amazed and so excited to learn about a culture and a group of people. And next person. How about Sarah?
Everybody, good morning. Sarah Spansdale, she, her. I am here in Southern Oregon in Medford. I always loved school. But as far as like my favorite, honestly, I just started going back to school to finish my bachelor's like a year ago. So I'm in my like 1 month of no school right now, but I'm kind of loving going to school at this older age again, and just really enjoying like everything I get to learn. So I'll go with now. And how about I pass it to Stuart?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stuart Warren. I'm also in Eugene. And I think my favorite grade was probably the fourth grade. Just had an amazing teacher who's so fun and very good at teaching. And how about I'll pass it over to Stefan.
Everybody, I'm Stefan Janakis, he, him. Um, I just forgot what it was, but I had my favorite. Oh yes, my favorite actually time in school was probably when I went to community college, right after high school, because that was the first time I was actually able to meet a wide variety of people who were unrelated to me, who had you know, real lives, and to actually figure out how, to get to use the millennial term, the adulting, start to figure that out. So that was probably one of my favorite experiences, just because of the variety of people I met from all walks of life. I guess I'll pop it over to Jennifer.
Hello, good morning. My name is Jennifer. I'm joining from Springfield. Favorite school experience? Probably like looking for earth sciences and looking at fossils in the Great Basin. Got to spend a couple of months in the desert, like looking at seafloor fossils, and it was really fun. Let's see, who hasn't gone yet? Zachariah?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Zachariah. I live in Bend, and I joined a bit late. I think based on responses I've ascertained that the prompt is like favorite school experience or something like that. Thumbs up. All right. I mean, field trips come to mind as just really fun times to get out of the classroom and experience the real world, so to speak. One particular one that comes to mind is in sixth grade. The middle school I was in did an overnight trip to Lake of the Woods and did a like get kids out into nature, and we got to spend the night in cabins and learn to fish and talk about how to survive out in nature. And that decades later, still remember that experience. Anybody else that hasn't gone?
I would
Ingrid?
love to hear from Ingrid.
Yeah.
Everyone, Ingrid Cordell. I'm here in Salem. I went to a boarding school in New Zealand, and I think my senior year there was my favorite because we had a really nice teacher who probably felt sorry for us because we were shut in, had no life. So she would take us out and just treat us to lots of nice things. But also she was so helpful when I was trying to get a job right out of high school, and because of her, I got a really good job out at the airport as an air traffic control assistant. So she was instrumental in helping me do that. Sadie, do we go to anyone else now, or do we let the other stuff off the hook?
I think we can let our other staff off the hook, unless Hui or Meg, you want to share your favorite school memory. Otherwise, we can move on to our public comment item, just a bit ahead of schedule. And do we have anyone that is here to provide public comment to the Community Involvement Advisory Committee? Philip, I'm looking at you. If you're here to listen and learn, that is fine. I just want to make sure that if you are here to provide comment to the group, that is something you have the opportunity to do. Okay. Well then, I think we can move on with our agenda items. Maybe we will just cruise through this meeting in rapid fashion. So item 3 on our agenda is the CIAC 2026 meetings calendar. And I don't know, Ingrid, if you want to share, or if you want me to share. Here, I'll do it. Oh, you got it. Thank you. So Ingrid did us the favor of looking at the LCDC calendar for the upcoming year, and LCDC will be having 6 meetings in 2026, as opposed to the quarterly meetings that we tried for a couple of years and found challenging to fully commit to. And then we sort of ended up with extra meetings here and there anyway. But we will stick with our quarterly schedule and see how that works in terms of aligning the work. And with the meeting schedule that is proposed for LCDC, in order to incorporate CIAC feedback into our staff reports in a timely fashion, these are the months and dates that we are proposing for the 2026 meetings calendar. And then on our next agenda item, I will have a question about whether or not we would like to meet one more time in 2025 in advance of our February meeting with LCDC, which if we stick with this calendar and don't add something for the end of 2025, this would be the last time we meet in 2025 before meeting in February 2026. And I'm not trying to add meetings to anybody's calendar that we don't need. But should our next agenda item leave us with the impression that we do need a meeting, I'm just putting that out there at this point. But any discussion on the proposed meeting dates? I think that we decided, Leah, that we don't need your vote. We just kind of need a thumbs up on the meeting calendar, but I do see a hand. Sarah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that for the May, I missed this past May meeting because I'm always gone the weekend after Memorial Day weekend, which is the May 29th week Friday. So just a heads up on that. And then I noticed the November 27th date. I think that's the day after Thanksgiving. And I would just propose that maybe we do that a week earlier instead of the day after Thanksgiving for, traveling.
All
and
the
stuff.
reasons. Yeah. Thank you for flagging that and calling it out. Yeah, I think we can definitely adjust our November date if indeed that does seem like it is likely with that time of year. Any other thoughts or questions? And I think we have had the May date fall near Memorial Day weekend in the past, and sometimes we've tried to adjust for it and other times we have just gone with it. Is that a problem for anyone else if we choose that date? I don't have plans that far in advance.
I
Okay,
don't have any
so
conflicts at this point and support us moving the November date for sure.
yeah. Okay. So should we just get a read of the room, or do you think we're good to move on, Leah? Want to ask for thumbs up or anything like that?
Yeah, we can do, if everyone maybe just wants to give us a thumbs up, that this generally looks good. I think that would be helpful. Oh, floating thumbs. I love this new part of Zoom. Okay. Does make it hard to track, but I think I got thumbs from everyone. So if not, feel free to send any conflicts you might have to Sadie and Ingrid after the meeting as well, if you still need to look at calendars.
All right, well, we will go ahead and get those calendared so they show up on your calendars so that you can reserve the time well in advance in this case. And then our next agenda item is discussion of our joint meeting with the Land Conservation and Development Commission. So for those of you that are newer to the group, we shifted our work plan. Gosh, I guess it was like 4 years ago. Is that even possible? to a biennial work plan, which means it is good for 2 years. And that helps it align with our policy agenda, which is also a 2-year document. And it gave us the opportunity to free up some of our joint meeting time with the Land Conservation and Development Commission for kind of deeper discussion on topics that are relevant to community engagement. And because we're not developing a work plan, and that's something that we coordinate with the Land Conservation and Development Commission in doing. So in the off years, which 2026 will be, what our plan is to kind of dive deeper into topics. And I had an idea and a proposal for the group on what we might present or discuss with LCDC. And that is, as we are, a few meetings ago, we did kind of a website exercise. And as we are migrating our website to a new space, one of the discussions that's come up frequently is how can we, as DLCD, support smaller jurisdictions in their land use planning work? It's one thing to be from Eugene or Portland or Springfield or Bend even, and to uphold 19 land use planning goals. And it is another thing entirely to be from Bay City or Drain, and so we have been thinking a lot about that internally as we are thinking about how we can present information on our website. And I thought perhaps a fruitful area of discussion with Commission would be to look at our past ACE award applicants that are from smaller or lower population jurisdictions, and to discuss with them or to have a discussion about how they are able to uplift the kind of community engagement that we've seen, which is really, I think, been pretty remarkable in some of the applications. So from my notes, we looked recently at the Monmouth Alley Activation Project, which I thought was a good example. And then some of our group members here, or our committee members, have had the benefit of seeing the Wasco County Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, community engagement efforts, the Morrow County Rural Transit Equity Project. And then we had some other small city applications, one from Oak Ridge on community priorities for the Willamette Activity Center restoration, and the Bay City Code Amendments Project that resulted from their very first planning staff member coming to Bay City. So we thought that could be kind of an interesting lens to look at community engagement through. How does it happen in these contexts of very small jurisdictions or low population counties? What are the different considerations that they have to take in sort of launching and supporting an effort like that? So that was an idea from me. I'm happy to hear ideas from others, and we'll take some notes. And then on the agenda, it notes maybe we need a subcommittee, but I'm also happy, Ingrid and I are happy to schedule another, it wouldn't need to be maybe a 3-hour meeting later in the year to kind of discuss the process or, how far staff have gotten in coordinating this and update the group if we feel like that's necessary. But a subcommittee could do the same, or you could just direct staff with what you'd like to see as outcomes for this conversation at this meeting. But Commissioner Warren, I'd be very interested to hear from you if you thought that there were community engagement topics the commission might be particularly interested in learning more about.
The only thing that comes to mind for me right now is over the last few years, we've been passing more rules around how cities and some counties engage their communities. So maybe hearing a bit from the folks who are doing that work. And I'm thinking about like the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking and the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis rules, just to hear like from cities, like how is it working?
Good one. Leah, others?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear what other members of the committee are thinking at this point. I think a feature or panel on small city engagement would be different than things we've done in the past, and I think is useful for helping the commission understand how some of this work gets right-sized at the small city or at the county level, and what it means to prioritize community engagement when you have one planner or limited resources generally, or are relying fully on consultant support. Right, and that one planner is more of a project manager than doing a lot of that direct work, is instead kind of hoping for project-based resources to bring on a consultant to support them in that, which I think is probably the case in some of those ACE applications we looked at as well, would have been probably consultant run. So it's a little challenging because I think most of us on the CISC today are from some of the bigger cities. And so it would be great if we had a small city planner to give us a little bit of that perspective too. But that's my initial hit. I mean, I'm curious from Commissioner Warren's perspective on like CFEC rulemaking and ONA rulemaking, if there is already plans to bring the commission some of that perspective on how some of this rulemaking is playing out or being implemented by local jurisdictions around community engagement, or if this would be kind of the opportunity to share that with them. I don't know if you know yet, Sadie, but I'm kind of curious about that. I'd love to hear from other folks too.
Yeah, I can check our brainstorm list. I'll navigate away from my notes page here in a second to do that. I don't know, but it's a very good question because I could kind of see it plan out both ways. Like, yeah, this is the opportunity, or maybe it's something. And certainly, if we decided to go in one direction versus the other, I could put a conversation of that nature on the LCDC brainstorm list. They have some pretty full agendas, as Commissioner Warren knows. So, you know, when we could fit it in, would probably be the question. I think they're pretty booked out at this point. Any other thoughts from folks? Trying to think of how to appropriately describe the last presentation we had with Healthy Democracy and Ethan Sherrigan from the Population Research Center at Portland State University. It was just to give members of the group who haven't been with us for very long a sort of some creative space to think in. But Healthy Democracy is, gosh, maybe you can help me, Leanne Stewart. It's a deliberative democracy process where folks are chosen in a lottery system to participate in kind of some long-range planning efforts and ideas. And it is a really great way of leveling the playing field. And they came and presented on their process to the commission. And then Ethan Sherrigan from the Population Research Center talked about some innovative ways of using data from the American Community Survey and the United States Census to sort of expose some patterns of, population distribution that might help us understand where more marginalized populations are living and how we can use that data to support our planning efforts. And so that was our last kind of like educational presentation or like discussion topic with commission. And it was really interesting, and they liked it a lot, which is why we're thinking again about how we can present them with kind of more new and useful information that can round out our understanding of kind of promising practices in community engagement and maybe next steps, things that we can consider, things they can consider, and things for local governments to sort of use as resources. So that's the idea.
Zachariah, go ahead, and then Sarah, I saw you come off mute as well.
Yeah, I just want to share support for the idea and mention that I think the framing of the conversation will be critical so that it's not just a here's all the challenges and the reason why that we, it's more, reason why community engagement at a small jurisdiction is, is maybe not as ideal as, or is not, it doesn't come to fruition as much as maybe our committee would like it to be. And so, happy to be involved in more discussions and framing up questions and kind of the scope of what that presentation and discussion could look like.
I was just gonna also support the idea of, kind of looking at those smaller cities. Being from Medford, it's not a smaller city, but we have a lot of small neighbors, and I have a couple close friends on, say, Talent City Council, and get to hear the challenges and, about the differences there, and how things work. So I think that would be really beneficial. Especially looking at kind of the community engagement practices there. And also, I had one more other comment around that, but it left. It's fine. Oh, CFEC, that's what it was. And you mentioned CFEC and rulemaking, and even from a not so small town, I was on council during the time period that Medford was dealing with some of those changes. And, even from a larger city, there was some concerns, obviously, and pushback about just those whole rulemaking process. And so, that's why we're here, is to keep making that a smoother process for everyone, right? And more engagement. So.
One of the things I was thinking about was, how do folks manage and resolve misinformation that might emerge in engagement processes? I know some peers who have some challenges with that, but I think everyone's getting better at combating misinformation and like where misinformation comes from, because I think that tends to create some interesting conflict, but also maybe extends some types of like engagement activities or timelines that were initially set out, like around some geographies or in certain communities, misinformation might emerge, and I'm curious how people navigate that.
I love that one.
I was gonna say, I feel like DLCD has done some small town or rural projects and rulemakings recently that maybe there's like a DLCD staff person who could also kind of speak to doing engagement work in smaller cities or rural areas, and some of the same challenges that you all as a state agency have faced. And there could be some interesting interfacing with local government representatives in a conversation around that.
Yeah, our engagement with folks around the offshore wind energy work that we are doing right now for the offshore wind energy roadmap. The coastal communities is a very different dynamic. There's really, there's different and nuanced challenges in a lot of different parts of the state. And I think, I don't want to say we have a one size fits all program, but we do have 19 goals to which everyone is, all of our jurisdictions are responding. But I do the misinformation close to home right now. Thank you for bringing it up. Any other thoughts? Or Leah, how would you like to move our conversation forward? Because we have plenty of time for this discussion, which was intentional, so that we could get through as much as possible today.
Yeah, I mean, Sadie, you shared some of the projects that we've received recently as ACE applications from rural counties or smaller cities. I'm curious if other folks have examples in mind. I think, Maria, that leading question or topic area, I think that's really helpful too in framing up a panel discussion. Do folks have projects that you've encountered in your work, or cities that you think or counties that you think are doing a good job around this that you've interacted with that we might reach out to? Trying to think of, we've leaned on ACE award winners in past panels as well. I think it's a great starting point, but if there are others that you think are worth reaching out to or investigating, I'd love to hear about that too.
Maybe we could sort of brainstorm some questions for a panel conversation. And that might help us figure out sort of the number of panelists that we can support. I think 60 minutes is probably the ballpark that we would need to stay in for a presentation to commission at their February meeting. And so, if we have 4 panelists, we can sort of say, okay, everybody does a 10-minute presentation, and then we have some back and forth. If we have 3 panelists, we can say everybody gets maybe a 15-minute presentation if we wanted to do it like that, or we could sort of do it in more of the panel format you might see at like a conference or something, right? Where you're directing questions to each person in order. So I don't know if folks have a vision for a format on presentation. We've sort of tended towards the former in the past, but that doesn't need to be precedent setting at all. So do folks have a vision for how your panel with commission is going to go? What's the best way to get the most out of it?
I think if we are asking smaller jurisdictions to participate, I like the idea of not burdening them with doing a huge presentation. And so maybe it's something short about like what they've worked on, the place that they work and plan for. And then primarily a facilitated discussion, I think, is appealing to me, and some leading questions that they can prepare for and respond to. But definitely curious what others think. Zachariah?
Yeah, the first that comes to my mind is having each panelist um, share like uh, a success as well as a challenge, um, and maybe as like part of their intro, and then dive into um, open discussion with again following on my last comment, having some structured questions to make sure we don't derail into. Yeah, I think that would be good.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, Sakura. Other thoughts? Things you'd like to leave the commission with? I think that's also a good way to think about this. It's like, what do we want? This is our one meeting with commission every year. Things we want to leave them with, takeaways.
I was just thinking, and this would add a bit of workload, but um, I would like to do, if possible, maybe some kind of polling of these smaller communities, just of the planners. Just it wouldn't have to be very formal. It would just be kind of get a baseline, see if there's try to find the commonalities, pinch points, and that kind of issue, those kind of issues, and then from there see the individuals who might have a little more to say in that regard. They would be perfect to bring on and talk to about, getting the higher engagement, getting higher engagement in their communities, and getting the process to work better for them. But I don't know if that would be that extra workload would be possible.
I mean, but I love it. Like, I'm like, oh, a survey to small cities? Oh, that's like my jam. I always think I'm gonna get greater participation in my surveys than I do, but I still love surveys. It hasn't diminished my my passion in the least to have nobody interested. Which is not true, not nobody, but I like that idea. And maybe there's kind of like a hybrid. The nice thing about our ACE Award applicants is we know who they are. We know how to get in touch with them. And that's probably not universally true. Some of these projects may have, planners on staff that have moved on to do other things in different places. I think we could do that. I'm trying to think if we have any sort of existing questions that we could repurpose, but I like the idea a lot. I don't want to take over the group's will, but I do think it's a interesting approach, and I would love if we do want to pursue it, to have some help on what kind of questions we might ask. I can certainly come up with things and run them by the group, not on the fly. But if you had things in mind that could give me a place to start in those kind of questions, it might also help us if we're moving in this small cities direction to think, if we're thinking about poll questions, they might translate very well to panel questions, discussion questions for the group.
Yeah, I'd be curious what your regional reps at DLCD could offer, or maybe provide some additional resourcing there, since they know a lot of work with a lot of the smaller city and county planners.
Good idea.
They might already have a sense of what could be interesting to ask of them, or other groups and projects that would be good to lift up in their regions. Be great to get some statewide, representation of different projects and a good variety.
That's a great idea, Leah. Our regional reps are honestly like where we flex, right? That's like one of the biggest strengths of the program. So I love that approach too. So I think what I'm hearing is small cities is a good approach. If we take Stefan's idea and run with it, I would coordinate with regional representatives on pulling together a poll for small cities that would help us understand the challenges at that level. And I think maybe to Zechariah's point, having folks report on a success as well could help us balance the information presentation and just get some quantitative data that we can show some of these bigger points. And then I think when we have that information, it will be easier to know what questions we should ask. And so I'm thinking, given this, that we probably do need to have a subcommittee or another meeting. And I guess it would be the desire of this group to tell me which one is the better approach.
Do we have anyone who's interested and excited about putting together this panel who'd want to be on a subcommittee? A subcommittee of meeting once, Sadie? One time? 2 times?
I think maybe once to review the questions that we'd like to ask, and I'd hope to have something like kind of ready to go out the door, maybe in October. I don't want to run into the holiday season or anything. And then once to review the results and kind of think about what questions we might ask based on those results. Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah.
They don't have to be long meetings. I'd say I'll bring snacks, but we're just going to do it like this. So even if I did.
I'm interested. I don't know how many people we would need for a subcommittee, but if that would work better for other people, I can make it work.
I think 1 is my minimum, Stefan. So. But we have others who are interested. Stefan and I would love to have you join us.
I could be on your subcommittee.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Stefan.
All right. Well, that is pretty exciting. I love that. Thank you for thinking it through. So let's see, Ingrid, I'm going to just capture in my notes that we will send out invites to Jennifer. Okay. Well, we are a little ahead of schedule. Let me look at our agenda and see.
Yeah, I was thinking, Sadie, if any of our presentations are ready to move forward, we could get one done before we take a break.
And the same thing. Meg Reed, I see that you are here, joined with us. Are you the entirety of our coastal access rulemaking staff?
Yes, I am. Yep.
And if we took those agenda items out of order, would you be ready to present right now before we took our break?
Sure. I'm happy to do that.
Superb.
All right, should I just share my screen? Oh, it's disabled. Would you be able to?
Yeah, I'll do that, Meg, just a second.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Ingrid.
Should be on now.
Okay, thank you. Okay. That look all right? Cool. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Meg Reed. I'm the Coastal Policy Specialist here at the agency, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about a rulemaking effort we hope to start at the LCDC meeting in October around the topic of coastal public access. So I'll talk a little bit just about the context and framework around public access in Oregon, and then how we got to this point of suggesting a rulemaking effort and kind of what that might look like, and then hear from you. So just a quick overview. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the beach bill that passed in 1967, which was a pretty historic and gave us a recreational easement over the dry sand beaches of the Oregon shore. And this was in addition to the wet sands, which we already had access to, but this broadened the easement over to the dry sand beaches as well. And so it is a recreational easement. It's not ownership. So there sometimes are still privately owned ocean area or beach areas, but it's a recreational easement, and so people can recreate on it, and those owners don't pay taxes on those lands, and that's the sort of compromise. So that's one big piece that does protect the access to the ocean shore. That's different from the estuaries where we don't necessarily have that same kind of access, but there is still some protections there. And then we have our statewide planning goals that Sadie was mentioning before. The last 4 of those are coastal resource specific, and in particular for the purpose of public access, goals 16, 17, and 18 have some provisions, and those are about estuaries, coastal shorelands, and beaches and dunes. Goal 17 is the primary protection provision, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And then also our agency is home to the Oregon Coastal Management Program, which is a federally approved program that manages Oregon's coastal zone. And it's a partnership with the federal government. And every decade or so, we do a public access inventory of every site within the coastal zone. And that's over 1,000 sites, and it's a lot of places to go and inventory, and it's done, like I said, about every 10 years since 1990. And it is a pretty significant resource for our local government partners, as well as the public more broadly, to understand where public access sites are and kind of what amenities they might provide and things like that. As you might imagine, there are definitely some pressures on public access on the coastline, and that has changed over time and has become maybe more apparent in some ways. And so here are some listed here. We definitely have an increase in the coastal population, and especially the visitation to coastlines over time. There's also increased development pressure and encroachment of access sites by private property interests. Then we have definitely impacts of hazards along the coastline, especially erosion due to sea level rise and storms and other climate impacts. The Oregon coast has one of the most energetic winter wave climates in the world, so it is a really challenging and dynamic place. We also just have a lack of resources. You all were just talking about small communities, and that's definitely what is prevalent along the Oregon coast. And so there's just a lack of resources to keep up with just maintaining public access, especially with the pace of visitation increasing. And then there's certainly a demand for improved public access to our coastal shorelands and the infrastructure that goes along with that, including for accessibility. So things like parking lots and bathrooms, ramps and walkways. And then in many coastal communities recently, there have been efforts to provide things like Moby mats and wheelchairs that can be taken onto the beach so that people who have mobility challenges can also access and enjoy the beach. So here at DLCD, we have come up with a few priorities around coastal public access that are listed here. And really our goal is to provide that technical support and assistance to our local government partners. And then some more broad kinds of priorities as well. So they're maintain and improve local comprehensive planning for public access, promote and encourage environmental stewardship in parallel with meeting public access needs, and promote education and outreach focused on coastal shoreline public access issues. So to that end, we applied for and got a federal grant a few years ago to focus on coastal access priorities. It was a 3-year project that just ended last September. And this is really, it was a concerted effort that really focused on a lot of public access topics for our agency. We were able to hire a limited duration position, and that person was able to conduct a survey. We had over 400 responses around public access issues. And we also did 3 listening sessions to kind of further flesh out those kinds of topic areas. And a lot of that was really helpful in informing the work that we then continued to work on, including putting together a coastal access advisory team. And that was comprised of various interests related to coastal public access, including tribal representatives, recreational groups, and state agencies. And they met over the course of a year and really provided a lot of really great feedback on a number of different topics, one of which was the development of a guidebook for local governments that was published about a year ago and is really good and important resources for local governments, including a chapter on how local governments can engage with tribal governments, which is the first kind of its kind for our department. It also developed some model comprehensive policies for updating local comprehensive plans. And we worked specifically through this grant with the city of Bandon and Clatsop County to do some updates to their comprehensive plan. The city of Bandon did adopt theirs, and Clatsop County is still working on theirs because they're doing a more comprehensive update to their coastal planning chapters, but it's fairly imminent. They'll be meeting with their planning commission next week. And then we actually had some extra funds from other parts of our grant work that we're now working with the city of Manzanita to do similar work from what we did with the city of Bandon. And they're also doing comprehensive coastal chapter updates so that we're working with them more broadly as well. But a lot of the work that the CAT, we've called the Coastal Access Advisory Team, or the CAT, they worked on coming up with different topics that they were really interested in working on with local governments and beyond. And they were kind of bucketed into categories of things that could be ripe for rulemaking versus things that could come in technical assistance or grant work or other things. And so those concepts that were ripe for rulemaking really helped inform this rulemaking effort that we're now embarking on. So I really just wanted to highlight how much work has already been put into this effort to lead us to this sort of final phase of rulemaking. So there has been a lot of input received around this topic to get to this winnowing down to the rulemaking draft. And I just want to give a thank you to all the people who participated on that Coastal Access Advisory Team. Their organizations are listed here. So we did have tribal staff, state agencies, and some other recreational and conservation and accessibility organizations who participated. So a big thank you to all of them. And they will be certainly invited to and may serve as rulemaking advisory committee members when we get to that point. So I'll just touch a little bit about what is the policy that we're actually going to be rulemaking under. So it is in Goal 17, Coastal Shorelands. I think of this as our working waterfronts goal. It's really about the uniqueness of the lands that are immediately adjacent to coastal waters. So that includes estuaries, coastal lakes, and the ocean shore. And in this space, there are some kinds of entities and interests that kind of are really dependent on the water in order to be there. So think like seafood processing plants or marinas and commercial fishing fleets and things like that, places that really need that access to water in order to be able to operate. So there are some protections within the goal about that water dependent zoning. And then also protection for the natural resources and the hazards that kind of present themselves in these areas. So protection of riparian resources and thinking through flooding and landslides that might occur because of access to the water. So those are kinds of the requirements and provisions of the goal. And then in addition to that, there is a specific implementation requirement around protecting and maintaining public access to the shoreline. So it's here in its entirety right on the screen, and I'll just read through it because it is pretty short. Local government, in coordination with the Parks and Recreation Division, shall develop and implement a program to provide increased public access. Existing public ownerships, rights of way, and similar public easements in coastal shorelands which provide access to or along coastal waters shall be retained or replaced if sold, exchanged, or transferred. Rights of way may be vacated to permit redevelopment of shoreline areas provided public access across the affected site is retained. So those are like the three main provisions that this requirement speaks to. And you can see that it's comprehensive, and yet it doesn't have any implementing rules or additional clarifications around it. And as we've seen with these kind of increases in public pressures on public access over time, there has been some desire to have some more clarity on what this means and what this looks like for our local government partners. There also have been some legal challenges in this space. Some of you may be familiar with the recreational immunity challenges that have occurred over the past few years. In this past legislative session, we did have some fixes to that to continue to provide safety to people who provide access to their lands for free in order to recreate, and that includes local governments. So their ability to meet this requirement for Goal 17 is really important and needs to be protected, and them to feel like they can continue to provide those access ways. So that's good that legislation just passed to be able to, for them to be able to do that and meet this requirement. So for our rulemaking effort, we're gonna hopefully recruit a rulemaking advisory committee, and this is just some of the highlights of the draft charge that we've developed at this point. It's just a simplification of the charge, but wanted to highlight that the rules should include definitions, requirements, and considerations for a coastal public access program, how to maintain and increase public access, a further explanation on rights of way and public easements, coordination between local governments, tribal governments, and state agencies, and considerations for equitable public access, protection for cultural and natural resources, and resilience to coastal hazards. So those are kind of the things that the Coastal Advisory Access team provided before, these thoughts around rulemaking and what other staff and other members have told us over time, and that the draft rule will seek to provide clarification on. And then here's a list of all the potential interests that might be on our rulemaking advisory committee, as well as the state agencies who have a role in this space. You can see it's kind of a lot, and we want our RAC to be a manageable size. So it's unlikely that we're going to have an individual representing every single one of these interests, but there could be someone who could have multiple perspectives and be able to serve more than one interest potentially, or at least have a breadth of knowledge on different topics. And then just I'll finally wrap up with our projected timeline for this effort. Like I said, we'll go to LCDC to ask for initiation of the rulemaking in October, and then immediately start RAC recruitment, have RAC meetings in December through May, and while we're drafting the rule language. We plan for a public town hall kind of question and answer style engagement opportunity for local governments and others who might be impacted by the rule to ask questions on the draft rule. And then we'll go to public hearing with LCDC in April of 2026, have one more RAC meeting between that meeting with LCDC and the one in June, where we hope to have an adoption for the rules, and then sometime maybe in September or later for the rules to become effective. I do want to emphasize that our hope with this rule is not to be an unfunded mandate on local governments, because we know that they're already so strapped and have a lot of other requirements coming down their way. So these rules are written so that they're not they don't become effective until local government decides to go down that pathway. So like doing a local or a coastal public access program, or if they're going to be changing their existing sites in any way, like removing a site or adding a site or switching a site for another one, then they would have to create findings to be in adherence to the rules, but it wouldn't be this big undertaking to update comprehensive plans right when the rules are adopted. So that's really one of our biggest hopes. So I'll wrap it up there and open it up for any questions or thoughts.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Meg.
Meg.
That
Yeah,
was
go ahead, Leah.
yeah, that was a great presentation, super comprehensive. And kudos, I'm not sure if Sadie, this was you or someone else at DLCD, this new format for having like a community engagement plan template is great. It seems it's new to me at least, and it made it really easy to look through the 2 rulemakings that we're getting presentations on today. So thank you. Kudos on
Thank you for
that.
the feedback.
Yeah, it really helps to understand what the rulemaking presentation is going to be on before we get the presentation. So thank you for that. Meg, I'm curious. I think this rulemaking is interesting because you've done so much engagement already through the Coastal Access Committee and other work, and then the rulemaking being kind of an outcome of all of that. Something that I find at a local level is sometimes there's this like tension for staff between all of this other engagement you're doing with the community, focused engagement or broad engagement, and then you get like this formalized body that gets a different sort of like power in the process, is lifted for their technical experience or their policy experience, and there can be some tension between how you honor all of the other engagement that has happened outside of the rulemaking. So I'm kind of curious how you're thinking about that tension, how the last few years of engagement will inform the RAC, how the RAC will build upon what you've already learned or honor what you've already learned through those opportunities. I'm just curious if you can speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. And I don't know. Yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge for sure. I'm hoping that we have a draft rule done at this point, which I think is helpful. I mean, it's a normal practice anyway, but it's helpful in this case because I didn't mention this yet, but there aren't any implementing rules for this topic already. So it would be creation of a new rule. And sometimes starting from zero is right, like it's overwhelming for people sometimes to come into that. And so there's a draft rule there to help with that. And the draft rule, we really tried hard to like make sure everything that we heard from the different parties so far had been addressed if they could be, like if it made sense to be in a rule. And in some cases there were things that like maybe made sense more in like for a grant project because it's more about like infrastructure improvements potentially. But if it made sense to be in the rule, then we put it in there. And so I think that we've done a pretty good job of like trying to capture all that was already said in the rule if it was relevant. But then the challenge will be like, okay, now we're getting new input, and is it going to be in a line with what we've already heard, or is it going to be totally different? And it's hard to say. I don't know. I do think probably we will probably end up with people from the Coastal Access Advisory Team applying to be on the RAC. So it could be some of the same people potentially. But I think there will probably be more people involved as well. And it is certainly, I would say it's a topic that makes people feel good generally, but it's also something that people feel very strongly about. And so it can be challenging to find a way because there is this like tension between balancing the public access versus like protecting potentially sensitive areas and also not like overwhelming a place to, or the resources of the local jurisdiction. So, yeah, I don't know. If you have any advice, I'd love to hear it.
I mean, I think what I would just leave you with is to be transparent about that, like managing and balancing those perspectives. I think if you have people on the rack who haven't necessarily been deeply involved, like I think about a young person joining or a trail user, someone who's not from one of the kind of resourced organization that engages in this typically, or a local government, they'll have a steeper learning curve. And so being transparent to them about like, here's kind of the framework that we already have and where this is built on engagement we've already done, versus here are the things that actually have more room for feedback and just where they can actually influence that. And sometimes I think it's like staff do that behind the scenes instead of doing some of that weighing and balancing in public or with that group. So I think the more you can just be transparent in that balancing, I think is valuable. But yeah, I'm super curious about how that'll go, and it seems like an exciting process. I'm curious if other CIIC members have questions or thoughts for Meg on embarking on this next rulemaking. Sadie, go ahead.
Not a member, but I do just want to ask, the survey that got over 400 responses, do we have the ability to communicate with those folks to let them know that we're initiating this rulemaking based on the feedback that we heard, and that there will be opportunities to provide comment and review what's being developed with the group, and maybe even, reach out to them with the application for the racks? I don't know if we have all that information or how it was collected or where, but it might be a potential opportunity to sort of build in some of that continuity that Leah was mentioning.
Yeah,
I
that's a
see.
good question. I don't know. Claire, who's actually still here, who was the limited duration position for this project, but is now in a new position, but she's still here, which is great. So I can ask her. But it's in that guidebook that I mentioned. We do have like a chapter that kind of like summarizes all the results that we got from that survey, and like kind of that kind of part of it. But it doesn't have obviously their contact information. So
Yeah.
I will look back and see if we do have that. Yeah. It might have been an optional question, maybe, like if you wanted to like hear more later or something like that, you could put in your email. So I'll look back to see about that.
Great idea. Sarah?
I thank you. This was an excellent presentation, and I was just looking over the list of the proposed interest groups, and it's very thorough. But I was thinking as I was reading through this that it might be good as just another interest group to add on there would be someone from like emergency management kind of background. That was all.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good idea.
Thanks, Sarah. Other questions, thoughts? I think for folks who are new to the CIIC, our role in reviewing rulemaking kind of process and specifically proposed interest groups is really to inform staff, give our ideas on engagement strategies, who might be appropriate groups for the RAC moving forward.
And if we have any members of our committee who are interested in serving on this RAC, we do always sort of keep a seat open for interested CIAC members to participate if they wish. So if that is something that's up your alley and you really want to get involved in this coastal access work, now is a great time to speak up. You can also let us know, as this is not being initiated by commission until October. You could let Ingrid or I know, and we could pass that information along to Meg after the meeting if it's something you want to think about and consider. But I wanted to let the group know that when we do create a rulemaking advisory committee, we always have a seat for a CIAC member if there is interest.
Yeah, I'll add that all the meetings will be virtual, so they hopefully should be easy to access. And there'll be probably 4 of them between December and May.
I am curious, this is something I noticed in the wetlands rulemaking too, and something that is a practice that they're doing with ONA. The practice of having a RAC meeting after the LCDC public hearing is interesting to me, and something that's different from local process. Like, we wouldn't normally be able to do that, like to make meaningful changes after a public hearing. So I'm curious about that practice, and maybe that's just like a DLCD wide policy. I think there's some challenges built into doing it that way, to potentially making big changes after the opportunity for a public hearing. And so I don't know if this seems to be a consistent thing with DLCD rulemaking. And so Meg, you might not be the right person to answer this, but I am curious about how you think about that opportunity, and the feedback loop around if there are meaningful changes made after the public hearing and kind of what that looks like.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to like just what I know of it. I know
Yeah.
it's actually a new process for us too. We
Mhm.
didn't used to do that. But I think it's because it's actually to try to be more transparent with the RAC, that like if LCDC was changing things at the public hearing, then it was an opportunity to give the RAC a chance to kind of like think about that and digest it. My understanding is that the changes to the rule wouldn't really be outside of what LCDC directed us to do at the public hearing and based on potentially like public comment received. And so it wouldn't really be like a chance to open up everything again. It would just be like to incorporate what direction we got from LCDC, if any, and just like a final chance to like digest that rule language before it's filed or finalized with the Secretary of State. So I think that's my understanding, is that it wouldn't really allow for big changes to happen at that time, but just kind of like transparency with the RAC.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Great question though, Leah, and it makes me kind of wish our senior rules coordinator was here to really kind of like hammer in on the details and the reasoning behind it, because I know that there's people more informed than Meg and I on why we are taking this approach and how things have changed over time. It might be a good topic of conversation for us at some point in the future if we have room on our agenda.
Any other thoughts or questions from CIAC members? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Meg. Thanks for being here and your flexibility and moving your presentation up. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the time and the feedback. Thank you.
Shall we take a break?
Yeah, I think so. I know a couple more DLCD members joined us, but I think if that works for you, we can take, what did we have on the schedule? A 10-minute break?
We had 10 minutes. I want to just check in with Alyssa and Aurora to see about any hard stops in your schedule around the policy agenda presentation, so we can shorten up our break by a few minutes if we need to.
I do think Alyssa has an 11 o'clock.
So maybe we'll take I think that's still gives us a fair amount of time. If we took a 5-minute break, would that work for everyone? And then we could make sure that we get Alyssa's portion of the presentation before she has to
Yeah.
split for another meeting.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably get us out of here early anyways, so that feels okay. Okay, so we'll come back at 10:22 and get started with the policy agenda.
See you then.
Thanks.
Laura, good morning.
Morning.
And Alyssa. Perfect. 2 members of our A team who all have first names beginning with A. There's only 3 of them. There's only one more. And sadly, he won't be able to join us this morning. But we are in capable hands with Aurora and Alyssa, walking us through the 2025-27 DLCD policy agenda. And so I know you guys have a presentation ready, so I think I can just turn it over and let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Sadie. Can y'all hear me okay? Great, thanks. All right, well, let's dive in. I think Aurora, are you able to share our slides with folks? Awesome, thank you. All right, so as Sadie mentioned, my name is Alyssa Benini. I'm a legislative and policy analyst with the department. I joined in January of this year. So as we launched into session and then came out of it, I'm still definitely finding my feet here, but I'm excited to be here with you all today. By way of background, I came to DLCD from the private sector where I was doing a lot of community engagement work on environmental projects with groups here in, I'm based in the Portland metro area, but then also around the state. So it's really great to meet you guys and hear a little bit about the work that you're doing. All right, so I think we can go to the next slide. And I guess you've all met Aurora, but Aurora, just do you want to say hi before we dive in?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Aurora Jettle, she, her pronouns. I'm a legislative and policy analyst here, and I focus on the housing and urbanization side of our policy portfolio. So nice to be here with you this morning.
Great, thanks, Aurora. Okay, so before we dive in fully, I wanted to preview some discussion questions that we'll revisit at the end of our presentation, just so you have these to kind of frame how you receive the information we have for you this morning. Towards the end of our presentation, we'll just be asking, what projects this group is most interested in generally or in hearing more about, getting involved with. How can the department best facilitate representation of these diverse opinions on our RACs? And then if there are specific interest groups or organizations that you think should be engaged on these projects that we're going to be talking to you about today. So just keep those in mind. We'll pull this slide back up at the end of our presentation to help guide our conversation, but just so you're aware of that. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so just to give the lay of the land here. So the policy agenda, as I'm sure you're all aware, lays out all of the major policy items that the department takes on during a given biennium. These are mostly focused around rulemaking, but it does also include some high-level projects that the department is working on. The rulemaking work is divided into 2 buckets, not equally. So there's complex rulemaking and then conforming rulemaking. So as a reminder, complex rulemaking happens when the department is tasked with interpreting statute and creating or directing program implementation. This process requires that we garner outside input, usually through our RACs. On the other side, conforming rulemaking doesn't require statutory interpretation by the department, but requires us to just put what's written in statute into our rules, and this doesn't typically involve a RAC. So we create a new policy agenda every 2 years after the long legislative session, which, as we know, just wrapped up in June of this year. We then update the policy agenda after every short session so that it remains current and reflects our progress on the original policy items, and then also has the opportunity to add any rulemakings or projects that were assigned to the department during each legislative short session. So it's a relatively living document in that sense. Anything you'd add, Aurora, before we move on? Great. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so I think the first bucket of items we'd like to touch on this morning are our legislatively directed complex rulemakings. Before we speak to each of these, one that I do want to note for this group specifically that's not on the slides is House Bill 3569. And this doesn't call out DLCD directly, but applies to all agencies that engage in the rulemaking process. Because it requires that an agency that appoints a RAC to inform rules that implement a piece of legislation either do one of two things. One, invite the chief sponsor or chief sponsor's designee of the legislation, or if the legislation arose from a committee, invite the chair or chair's designee of that committee that sponsored the legislation to participate on the RAC as a non-voting member. So that means that legislators would be participating on RACs, although I think it would be more of an informational and observational role. They wouldn't actually be taking part in any votes that the RAC may or may not be using to inform their process. I'd like to note, just because we're aware of some concerns that were raised about how having legislators on RACs might impact the dynamic of RACs going forward. The governor did issue a signing letter when she signed this bill into law that clarifies her expectations around the implementation of this legislation. So, for example, she clarified that a legislator's availability is not an excuse to hold up a rulemaking, that agencies should not be expected to accept proxies for that legislator. Only active legislators are eligible to participate. So if a rulemaking is arises from a piece of legislation that was sponsored by a legislator that's no longer in office, arises, that sort of speaks to that situation there. And that the goal for the rulemaking process remains to be a clear, predictable, and inclusive process. So not trying to affect the RAC process at all in that regard. So anyway, this piece of legislation will be applied to RACs appointed beginning in the new year. So that's January 1st, 2026, and moving forward. So it will affect a number of rulemakings that we'll be speaking to you about today. So anyway, just wanted to mention that to you. Again, the bill number was House Bill 3569 if you wanted to look it up on OLIS, and we're also happy to answer any questions you might have about that as we move forward. So with the background set, let's dive in. The first bill that I'd like to mention to you is Senate Bill 504. And this arose out of the 2025 session, and it directs the commission to adopt rules that allow, define, and provide guidance on non-structural nature-based solutions for shoreline stabilizations in estuaries, coastal shorelands, and then the ocean shore. So the purpose of this is that they're trying to avoid the use of structural shoreline stabilization materials like riprap, and instead use more natural materials that can mimic natural systems and absorb wave energy. And the purpose of this is just to minimize harmful impacts from flooding and erosion along the shorelines. There is one caveat in there that the Oregon Department of Transportation is still able to use that more structural type not nature-based materials on their transportation projects, but that's the only caveat there. So the rulemaking deadline for this piece of work is January 1st of 2028. So working backwards, RAC applications are tentatively scheduled to open in July of 2026 and should include interests representing coastal engineering professionals, restoration professionals, representatives of environmental and recreational organizations, tribal representatives, landowners and managers, fish and wildlife professionals, and then local governments as well. Again, on that tentative timeline, the LCDC will be tentatively planning to deliberate and have the opportunity to adopt these draft rules at its June 2027 meeting. Again, the adoption isn't required legislatively until the first of the year 2028, so that does provide some time for flexibility there as needed. But that, I think, just trying to make sure we stay within our time bounds is all I have to say about Senate Bill 504. Again, happy to take any questions, but I'd like to pass it over to Aurora, and I see Sadie, your hand is up. Sorry, I've been rambling.
Yeah, no, you haven't. That was really helpful. Thank you, Alyssa. I had just a question about the interested parties that you just mentioned, because we have seen kind of examples of each where we determine who we think the interested parties in are versus the legislature designating them in the bill itself. Can you help us understand where that list is coming from? Is that written into the legislation?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I had recalled that it was written into the legislation, and now I'm pulling up the legislation and I'm going to, yes, yeah, it is in the legislation itself. And that's, those interested parties are required to be included in the RAC.
Limited to those interested parties, or do we
It doesn't
have...
appear to be, no.
Okay.
The exact language is shall appoint an advisory committee that must include members. So it doesn't say only. I think if there were additional members or additional interests that this group, I think specifically, doesn't feel is represented in that list alone, I don't see any language in the bill at first glance right now that would preclude us from making that list a little bit more inclusive.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good question. All right. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Aurora to talk us through some housing related projects.
Great, thanks so much, Alyssa. Yeah, so I'll start out with one that's actually continuing from our 2023-25 work plan and policy agenda. It is going to be wrapped up at the end of this year, but it's a pretty significant rulemaking, so I just wanted to touch on it briefly again. So HB 2001 created sort of a new paradigm around Goal 10 housing planning, specifically requiring cities above 10,000 and other select communities like metro unincorporated urban areas, in some Tillamook County cities and unincorporated urban areas, to plan for the current and future needs of their population rather than just basing housing planning off of past trends within their communities. And this is really supposed to kind of push the needle on meeting the housing needs of sort of everyone in the community based on like affordability and locational factors, and really just making sure that everyone has access to housing in the community of their choice that they can afford. The department completed the first round of rulemaking, and that was adopted by the commission last December. That included components of the program around HPSs, which is the housing production strategies that cities have to create and sort of abide by to outline the actions that they're going to take to meet the housing needs of their community, as well as what the acceleration program looks like. So if a city is underperforming, comparable to sister cities at the midpoint of their housing production strategy evaluation, then they could be referred into an acceleration program where the department would work with them to identify actions that they could take and state support that could be offered to get them closer to meeting their housing production targets. In this round of rulemaking, we have capacity and urbanization rules coming out. And so that's looking at the process of not only urban growth boundary expansions and swaps, but also how cities sort of do the analysis that comes before that. So buildable lands inventories, looking at what land is available for residential development within their urban growth boundaries. and how those processes then feed into either the UGB process or taking land use efficiency measures, things like upzoning and code changes and stuff like that that can increase the intensity of development within an existing urban growth boundary and help to meet some of that land need. So that'll be adopted at the end of this year, as well as some compliance pathways for the housing production strategies that I just mentioned. So that's going to be looking at ways that cities will either be sort of minimally required to take certain actions, or there will be standards set such as safe harbors or rebuttable presumptions, where cities are basically told these are the best practices, but you can also do it another way if you do your own sort of local analysis and find that there are other actions that are better suited for your specific jurisdiction. And so all of those concepts are in front of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee right now. There's also a TAC, a technical advisory committee, and a work group that's feeding into that process. So there's lots of different folks that are sort of helping to inform department staff's recommendations to the commission that will be going there at the end of the year. And the public comment for that is going to be at the October LCDC meeting, and we'll be running through October into early November. So just wanted to highlight that as we get closer to sort of finalizing those rules. So that's the most major thing we have coming out at the end of this year. Going into stuff that came out of the 2025 legislative session now, we have House Bill 2258. This directed the department to create rules around creating pre-approved site criteria that could be used to sort of outright allow residential development. So there's certain parameters already outlined in the bill for these sites. So they'd have to be within an urban growth boundary, zone for residential development, not be constrained by natural hazards or resources or anything like that. And then LCD is also authorized to provide additional parameters and guidance around this. So once those site criteria are established, if there's a site in any jurisdiction across the state, in conjunction with building codes, pre-approved building plans program or their master plans program, they could just get in sort of by right approval of residential development. So the building codes department produces building plans for single family units that are pre-approved across the state. And they also have a program by which developers can submit plans to them, and that keeps them proprietary, but then the developers can also get those approved sort of statewide. So as I said, that'll be working in conjunction with that program to create a really streamlined permitting process for residential development on those select sort of housing types. And I would note that the bill authorizes housing all the way up to sort of multi-unit, but because it has to work in conjunction with the current pre-approved building plans at BCD, it'll currently be sort of those smaller housing types. And then as they potentially expand the pre-approved plans or master plans that they have approved, the program can kind of expand with it in that way. And so we're going to be setting up a rulemaking advisory committee for that project. The tentative work plan has that starting pretty soon in late fall, around October or November. And then our adoption deadline for that is January 1st of 2027. So the rulemaking advisory committee will run through the end of this year and next. And we also anticipate this to likely be a project that is iterated on in the future. So, you know, a couple or a few years after the first adoption of the rules, it might be revisited for program updates, or like either from changes that have been made on BCD's side or just sort of lessons learned as we see it getting implemented on the ground. So I would just highlight that as something that you might see sort of come back in the future as well. And then the last complex rulemaking that we have on the housing side here is around middle housing. This came out of HB 2138, which was the governor's middle housing bill from this past legislative session. There is a large list of rulemaking requirements for our commission in this bill. So I'll just kind of run through them. Some of them are going to be around just revisiting our current Division 46 rules, which some of you may know, was adopted out of HB 2001, which passed in 2019. And that set some parameters around how cities and counties where that's allowed have to apply standards and procedures to middle housing development. So we'll really be revisiting that and looking at lessons learned over the past 5 or so years as those have been implemented, and sort of reconfiguring any of those standards or procedures to further incentivize middle housing developments. We've also been directed to adopt new rules on manufactured middle housing. Now that there's been code changes at the federal level, we expect to see an increased interest in manufactured, modular, prefabricated middle housing. And so we've been directed to create rules around how local governments apply standards and procedures to those housing types. And then in addition, we've been directed to create rules around single room occupancies and accessory dwelling units, as we currently don't have anything in rule on those. Our rulemaking deadline is January 1st, 2028. We also anticipate this RAC being stood up at the end of this year. And then that will run for a couple of years, right up until the adoption deadline is how it's articulated in the plan, with a pause for the long legislative session for a few months, as we usually take a little bit of time off there since folks are pretty busy. The component of this that I would mention that is sort of part of the rulemaking, but it's not like a binding rule in that sense or a requirement on local governments, is we've also been directed to create a sort of SDC model. The legislature has heard that in some jurisdictions, the way that SDCs are administered, it can disincentivize denser housing types, and particularly middle housing. And so we've been directed to look at that and to create a system development charge model that cities could voluntarily apply. However, as part of that, we'll also be doing a study that's due 6 months later on July 1st, 2028, to look at the feasibility of applying a legal safe harbor for cities who adopt that SDC model. And so that's sort of part of this process. And my understanding is that the folks that are have applied to this rulemaking advisory committee will also be able to inform the SDC work that we're doing. So those processes will sort of run together, all coming out of this bill. So that's it on the housing front for complex rulemaking that we got out of this last session. And I think I'm handing it back over to Alyssa to talk about some of the project work.
Yeah, thanks, Aurora. And before we move into project work, that was a lot of information and it's only about half of what we have for you today, maybe less than half. So I want to pause and see if there are any questions about anything you've heard so far. And there'll be a chance to ask questions in chat at the end too. But
I mean, I'll just speak up in regard to House Bill 2138 that we just reviewed. It seems to me like with the systems development charge aspect of this, there's a lot of tension in that space around infrastructure to support housing and SDCs, and I'll just be really interested to see how we incorporate those perspectives holistically. It's going to be a big challenge for our staff, I'm sure. But I'm glad to see it being taken up, but that is a tension for local governments, especially.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that there's good opportunity here for some of the studies that our new Housing Accountability and Production Office is doing. They have some studies that are due September 15th of 2026. So well before these rules are due, that are looking at local processes, specifically around public works and where there's barriers from that perspective. And so hopefully some of those recommendations might be able to feed into here as well. But that's definitely something we heard during the legislative process. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Aurora and Alyssa. I'm curious, you mentioned that the SDC study project, and maybe you're going to talk about this more, is going to be somewhat integrated with the rulemaking on middle housing and House Bill 2138. I guess I'm curious, I didn't see that in the summary that this was the SDC study would be focused on middle housing. Is that kind of the exclusive scope, or is that just a primary interest but not the entire scope of the SDC?
I would say it's more of the primary interest. So
Okay.
it won't necessarily just be for middle housing, but the intention is to create a model whereby across the board, middle housing is not disincentivized by the SDC structure that's stood up, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting to me. But yes, that clarification is helpful. Thank you.
Great.
With middle housing rulemaking and your mention of local processes, does rulemaking involve any types of rules related to service quality in local departments, communication standards and timelines, and like all the types of processes and I guess day-to-day stuff that may impact the success of middle housing?
This is more related to how local governments process development applications. So if I'm understanding your question, I don't think it would address those items.
Okay.
All right. All right, and if there are additional questions about the middle housing bill or anything that we've talked about so far, please write it down and we can make time to address your question at the end, but I think we'll keep moving here. All right, some additional projects that are included in our policy agenda for the 2025-2027 biennium well, here's one that should look familiar to you. It was arising out of the 2024 short session, that is House Bill 4080. So as a reminder, this bill requires DLCD to create an offshore wind roadmap that defines standards to be considered relating to offshore wind energy development in Oregon. It also requires us to submit a final report to the legislature with those findings. So the initial deadline for that report was September 2025, so in just a few days. But the update here is that the deadline for that report has been extended through House Bill 3963 during the long session to January 1st of 2027. So that's buying some additional time there. And just a little bit of an explanation about why we asked for an extension is that since the offshore wind energy development is no longer a pressing priority for the federal administration, there's really no urgency to complete this roadmap today. We now have another year to continue to do meaningful community engagement with tribal members and tribal representatives, and additional interested parties to ensure that this roadmap really represents that diversity of interest along the Oregon coast and across the state. It also will enable us to have longer public review and comment period than would have otherwise been possible given the September initial deadline. So just wanted to flag that for you all here that the new deadline for this report is January 1st of 2027. Next slide, please. Okay, and Sadie, can we do a quick time check? I know the agenda had the next item starting at 11:10, but I know Meg already went. So how are we looking?
I think we're in good shape. We just have one substantive agenda item after this one to complete by noon. So please take the time you need. Okay,
Great, thank you. All right, so I think I'll march down this list. I'll try relatively quickly, and apologies if I fail to do that. But there's a lot of great stuff going on here, and these are our executive branch initiated rulemaking projects. So the first one that I'll start with is continuing on. So it's been going on for a little bit here, and that's the Goal 5 rule update. So the department and the LCDC have been working together with representatives of Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes to explore how a new administrative rule for Goal 5 dealing with cultural areas could improve protections for those areas and items that are sacred to one or more tribes across the state. So the commission amended implementing rules for Goal 5 at its December 2024 meeting. And this created a new rule, a new administrative rule that will define and describe requirements and options for local governments as they consider these cultural areas within their jurisdictions. Additionally, the commission requested that RAC members reconvene in March of this year to consider an additional 3 elements of that rule. So the first being who can bring an application for a local government to consider a potentially significant landscape feature. Second one being how local governments might process this kind of application. And the third being how metro regional government might recognize a request for consideration of a landscape feature of cultural significance within the context of a regional UGB amendment. The RAC reconvened to discuss those 3 items. Draft rules were published with the Secretary of State actually this week, I believe, September 1st. And so we're currently in that public comment period until October 31st. We're accepting written or verbal comments at the rulemaking hearing that's scheduled to take place at the commission's meeting in September. I believe the date of that is September 25th, although Sadie and Aurora, if I'm incorrect, please correct me there. The commission will then deliberate and consider adopting the draft rules at its December meeting, and that I believe is December 4th and 5th. So there's a lot of new information about this rulemaking specifically. I saw something popped up in the chat. Zachariah, thank you for your question. I think we'll definitely make time to speak to that at the end. Thank you. Okay, I think that's all I have for Goal 5. Cruising right along to our Farm and Forest Modernization Project. So the commission initiated the Farm and Forest Modernization Rulemaking in 2024, and that focuses on a narrow set of technical items that were intended to improve the clarity and consistency of farm and forest program implementation across the state while reducing the number of unnecessary local appeals. So the commission directed our staff to propose rule changes that would codify existing common law standards, result in more consistent implementation of those standards, and then provide some clarity to counties and potential land use permit applicants about sort of how this process works. And based on the public comment that was received on those topics, the Rulemaking Advisory Committee conversations, staff proposed these rule amendments to meet the commission's goals, which the commission had then adopted at its meeting in December of 2024. At its March 2025 meeting, I think based on some interest that was expressed from legislators and from the governor's office, the commission directed the department to undertake some work related to soil reports, replacement dwelling, and agritourism after finishing a rulemaking relating to farm stands. I think chances are, if you were on the internet at any point over the last 2 months, you might have noticed that there was a lot of interest in this farm stand rulemaking, and that the governor has directed the department to pause that rulemaking so that we can work together with the governor's office to determine a thoughtful path forward, just given that interest. So the current update is that the rulemaking is still paused. We're moving into harvest season, which is a busy time for the folks that were serving on the initial RAC anyway. So it seems to be a good time to really make that pause meaningful and to reevaluate how to best complete this work. All right, the next topic we have here is the coastal access rulemaking. Since Meg already spoke to this morning, I don't know that I will try to emulate her fantastic presentation right now. I think I can probably skip that unless there's any additional questions, at which point I might hunt back to Meg. But I think unless there's any objection, I'll just go ahead and speak quickly to the Territorial Sea Plan update, which also arose as a result of House Bill 4080, which I spoke to a little bit earlier. But due to the work set out in that bill, it's likely that the Ocean Policy Advisory Council will recommend a rulemaking to amend Part 5 of the Territorial Sea Plan. And this part of a territorial sea plan relates to processes that are used to make decisions about renewable energy facility development in the territorial sea. So that part of the ocean that extends from the shoreline out 3 miles, where those developments may or may not happen. So the goal here would be to protect areas that are important to renewable marine resources. The exact dates of this work aren't known at this time, but the rulemaking would either occur at the end of this biennium, but there's also a chance that that work could roll on into the next biennium as well. So I'll pause, I'll take a drink of water. And if there are no questions, I'll pass it back to Aurora to talk to us about some urbanization work.
Yes. So the urbanization and wetlands one, you all are going to hear about later, I believe, but I can just kind of briefly touch on that. We've been hearing from some cities about, as part of their, urban growth boundary expansion and annexation process, there's some confusion about how that works in terms of wetland planning requirements. And specifically some delays that we're seeing with local wetland inventories or other wetland planning being approved. And so the department is aiming to sort of create a pathway to expedite development in those areas while also maintaining the wetlands protections. And so our folks, I think Amanda just hopped on, are going to talk about that in a second. And then in terms of the transportation rules, those are going to essentially revisit a couple components of the CFEC rules that were adopted around transportation modeling and greenhouse gas emission targets. I don't think it's the correct way to phrase that. And so just some minor programmatic tweaks there. And the work plan for that is still to be determined. So yeah, I think that rounds out our presentation. So we're back here at the discussion questions that Alyssa had previewed earlier. I don't know if we want to start with just what projects you all are most interested in. And then we can kind of get into your thoughts on the best engagement strategies for each of the projects that we spoke of. And one thing that I did just want to mention is we tried to sort of highlight the ones that have the most sort of serious public engagement processes, like those complex rulemakings and like big public projects and stuff. But that's not encompassing everything in the policy agenda. So that was sort of sent out separately. And if you guys have any additional questions or interest in any of the sort of smaller items that were in there that we didn't have time to touch on, definitely feel free to reach out or speak to those.
Laura, could we take Zechariah's question from the chat at the top of this? And that is, he's curious to hear staff's perspective on why the Goal 1 modernization legislation failed, and if there's a way that CIC can help something similar pass in the future.
Sure. I would say more broadly, the legislation did pass out of the policy committee, which is a good sign, indicates that there is some support for sort of the policy intent behind it. I will share on that front, there are definitely concerns about how amending Goal 1 could potentially increase timelines around development and things like that. So I think that there are some different perspectives on the policy side there, but by and large, I think it's fairly well supported that there should be good public process and engagement around planning, and that the community should have involvement in sort of what the outcomes of that work will look like in their communities. This session, there was just no money, to be blunt. We were in a pretty bad budgetary spot. And I think during those legislative cycles, it is much harder for bills outside of sort of the key priorities of the governor or the presiding officers to get funded. And particularly, we were in a budget cycle where the governor's recommended budget, which, as you know, has to be like a balanced budget, actually ended up having to get cut with the last revenue forecast that came out before the legislature passed their legislatively adopted budget. So it died in the Ways and Means Committee. There just wasn't really a lot of political will to fund it at this time. Yeah, Sarah, did you have a follow-up on that?
Not on that specifically, no, just the discussion questions here. What I would love to see, and I think would kind of best facilitate the representation of diverse opinions, is more of a one-stop shop on the website for community engagement. Kind of a one place to like see all of the current openings for racks, right? Like by different topics, which I'm sure like kind of exists in there. I've been poking around a little bit, but it's almost more like by topic and other pieces, and so I think you would have to dig. You can also, of course, like go and see all the upcoming public meetings, but I wouldn't say that I've been able to kind of find a place where it's like, here's the big upcoming public hearings, or even like where is it highlighted that this public comment period for this is going on between now and, anyways, is in September. And I'm sure all that stuff is in there, but just making kind of a more like, I'm interested in what, like I can actually get involved in right now, a way to engage, and making it just a bit more user friendly would be, if there's resources and capacity for that I think would be really great, and be able to facilitate more people getting involved.
Thank you for that, Sarah. That is a very timely comment. We are in the process of rethinking our website right now. And I love that direction and that vision. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Thanks, Aurora and Alyssa, again for your presentation. A couple of thoughts and questions. It might be too early for you to know this, but I am curious which of these rulemakings or projects you expect to have additional community engagement outside of the RAC convening itself. Maybe there's a built-in assumption that any complex rulemaking would have additional engagement. I'm curious, I know that's not like your wheelhouse necessarily, but if you know that, I feel like that would elevate my interest in the CIIC looking at it if there's additional engagement planned outside of rulemaking, or the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, I should say.
I don't know if tax count, but the HB 38 rulemaking, I anticipate will have a couple of different topic specific tax, like one to look at that SDC components, others to look at the middle housing, maybe another to look at the ADU SRO components. But I would at least anticipate two.
Okay.
There. I don't know that the 2258 RAC will have a TAC or anything outside of that. I would anticipate that maybe just being the RAC, although I don't want to put words in Ethan's mouths, but that's just how I would anticipate them structuring it.
Yeah. No, like Leah, I think what you're alluding to is like with the offshore wind roadmap development, we're having focus groups and reaching out intentionally to different community supportive organizations and utility providers and stuff like that. I think that's what you're alluding to. Have we budgeted for anything like that in the fiscals for this legislation?
Yeah, I mean, if we know that there will be that additional scope, I think that's helpful for the CIIC to understand. I know for ONA, you've also done some additional engagement, so I'm just not sure how much you know that in advance, or have maybe allocated funding for it. Yeah, to Sadie's point.
For either of the two housing rulemakings, I'm not entirely sure. I think ONA was very special in the sense of like it was entirely sort of like revamping the planning that's required under that goal, and a lot of that has to do with like how local jurisdictions engage with their communities and make planning decisions based on that and everything. So I wouldn't anticipate seeing the same level of that for either of these two housing rulemakings. What I will say is a project that may be of interest is the 1537 studies that are happening right now. Those are due about a year from now back to the legislature. There's 3 of them, although 2 of them have been combined because they're about building permits, public works, and land use and zoning processes and potential barriers to housing. And then there's another one around state agency programs and policies. And both of those have very significant engagement as part of them. Engagement with local governments and the development community and state agencies. And there's going to be some public comment periods as well. So I can connect you with the project lead on those if you're interested. I feel like that probably has one of the highest level of public engagement opportunities in the housing space going on right now. And then I don't know if there's anything Alyssa wanted to speak to on this, but.
No, I think nothing more than I've shared already. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of what materializes with the TSP update, but right now the timeline for that is kind of TBD. So, but I've written down your question, Leah. So I think as things kind of materialize and it seems like there's some additional scope or funding available for community engagement in any of these projects, it's good to know that SEAC is interested in hearing what those opportunities might be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my perspective. I'm certainly curious to hear from other folks that anytime the department is engaging in additional community engagement, in addition to convening a RAC, I think that's a great place for the CIAC to inform and support that work, certainly, because you all do RACs a lot. You kind of have like your process. So anything outside of that, I think, is a great place for us to weigh in. I think I personally am interested in, there's so much housing work happening. So some of the housing work, and as you mentioned, Aurora, probably the 1537 reports, I think those would be interesting for the CIAC to support, weigh in on how you take on that engagement work. I am curious about the farm stands rulemaking. It's probably too soon to know exactly what the like restart of that will look like, but given the connection of community engagement, misinformation, differing perspectives in that rulemaking and kind of the pause on it, it could be an interesting place for the CIAC to weigh in on if it's timely, but it might be too soon to know exactly. So my first takes.
Yeah, it is a fascinating situation we're in, I think, from that perspective. But yeah, it is too soon now, I think. So we're working with the Department of Agriculture and the governor's office to figure out what those next steps in the rulemaking might be, if any. And again, as I mentioned, because of the harvest season and this kind of natural break that seems to be happening anyway, it seems like a good time to really be intentional and thoughtful about how this topic is addressed, since it really does appear to mean so much to so many people around the state. But I'm noting your interest, definitely. And so as soon as we have identified what next steps might look like, if any, it's helpful to know that the CIAC is interested in potentially weighing in on that community engagement component.
Thanks. Other CIAC members, I think this is a great opportunity. We don't have the capacity as a committee to weigh in on all of these rulemaking and project efforts, just given our 4 meetings a year. So if there are topics that are of interest to you or you'd like to see the CIC weigh in on, or they have questions on, this is a great opportunity to help inform our work plan for 2026. Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, I did. I mean, just since you're asking kind of for random questions, I was curious on the greenhouse gas reduction rulemaking. One thing that just popped into my head as I was looking over that, and I was curious if it's like included or not, would be like data centers, and if those will be part of that discussion.
Sorry, trying to find my unmute button on like 3 screens here. Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't believe so, because it's specifically around our transportation and climate friendly area rules, which is really like reducing vehicle mileage traveled, like car travel and housing. I don't think that that specifically addresses data centers, from my understanding. I would also just clarify that this is kind of like maybe we will, maybe we won't. There's currently emission targets that are in the rules, and I think we're going to be seeing if the commission is interested in revisiting them. But yeah, as I said, I think that that'll mostly be focused on the transportation housing side of that. But that is a great point. Data centers are certainly, I think, a interesting issue area coming up with regards to land use and just sort of environmental issues and climate change generally. And water.
Other questions, comments from CIC members?
So, Aurora, maybe you can just confirm my understanding, which is our public comment period, as it says on the screen here, is September 2nd to 30th. You will be presenting the policy agenda to the Land Conservation Development Commission at the end of September, and then they will be adopting it in October with any changes that are necessitated by the public comment or feedback from the CIAC, et cetera.
Yes. And our presentation is going to be on that Friday, so September 26th. I believe it's sometime in the morning. And I would just clarify, I think that it's not like it's not a formal adoption. It's more of like a
Approval or endorsement. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, this is not like binding in terms of like, this is all you can do going forward, but it's more of like a informal, like, yes, this looks good to move forward with.
Mm-hmm. I'm already thinking along the lines of Sarah's comment of how we could include the information from the policy agenda and kind of our intentions and the different opportunities associated with them in an easy to digest way on our website. And I will leave that to my colleague Sean Carpenter to figure out, but it's a great idea.
Okay, well, seeing no more questions or comments, I think Aurora and Alyssa, we can let you go, but thank you both so much for the presentation and all your work on this. I know it's a lot to manage and keep your eyes on, so thanks for joining us.
Yeah, the in-depth knowledge that these two people have on the different pieces of legislation that are impacting DLCD is incredible. I mean, it's just really a gift to the agency. And yeah, thank you for sharing your time and some of your knowledge with us this morning. And I hope that if our CIC members have any additional feedback, feel free to share it with me, and I will pass it along to our legislative team, and we can make sure that your comments are considered as we move this towards endorsement or whatever sort of non-adoption frame we are placing this in for LCDC. But yeah, to give folks, I think I intended to do this at the top of this presentation, but committee members that are not terribly familiar with our process at this point, our policy agenda is, as they presented, a biennial document that's updated after the short session and the off years. It is all of the work that comes to us through the legislative session. And then what happens from here is, after this is endorsed by the commission, the individual rulemaking projects will come back to us. So we kind of get 2 bites at the apple. So an example would be the coastal access presentation that Meg gave earlier is kind of when we see it incrementalized, we have the opportunity to dive deeper. And this is the opportunity to say, hey, that's a place where I want to dive in. So if you look at your packet again and you think, gosh, you know what, I didn't speak up in the meeting, but I do want to make sure we get a presentation on something specific that's in here, especially the items that are complex rulemaking. That's really an opportunity for this group to inform staff and to help us improve our community engagement around these efforts. And that's why we're here. So we really would appreciate any of that thought or feedback in the interim. But in the meantime, Aurora, Alyssa, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I see that we are joined by a few more of my colleagues. It's always a great day when we have the CIAC and I get to see a lot of my favorite faces because I don't get to work with these people as much as I would like. So Amanda and Kevin, welcome and thank you for being here. We're a little off schedule. We took Meg's coastal access rulemaking earlier in the meeting. So this is our last substantive agenda item for address by the committee this morning. And I know we have looked through your presentation, but I'm excited to share it with the group. So I will let you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Sadie. Really happy to be with you all today. I'm going to share screen here really quickly. My name's Kevin Young. I'm a senior urban planner with the department, and myself and Amanda Punton, who is our natural resources expert, will be talking to you today about the hopefully upcoming wetland rulemaking. Our other colleague, Melissa Ahrens, was not able to join us today, but she's also an important part of the team. So, so this rulemaking effort is intended to be sort of a focused and technical exercise. The purpose for it is to free up a potential logjam that may result from current versions of the Goal 5 rules that relate to wetland protections. Our goal with the rulemaking is to allow an interim approach to Goal 5 wetland compliance that will allow housing and other needed development to move forward in non-wetland areas while the city works through a process towards an approved local wetland inventory and Goal 5 compliant wetland program. I know there's a lot of complexity there. Amanda will go into more detail about kind of what we're talking about there. But I just want to talk before we get started on sort of the impetus for this. We're seeing a real uptick, a real increase in urban growth boundary expansions in recent years, which has brought some of these wetland related issues to the fore. In addition, we're expecting the one-time UGB expansions and exchanges designed to facilitate housing development that we're anticipating following passage of Senate Bill 1537. We're expecting those to actually increase the number of UGB expansions we're going to be looking at in the future. So this rulemaking effort is intended to get out ahead of that, so that our Goal 5 rules don't hold up needed development in non-wetland areas. So at the end result, if we're successful, we'll have more housing and other needed development while maintaining wetland protections in that interim period. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Amanda. I hope everybody can see that screen okay. Okay, great. Go ahead. There we go. Amanda, are you seeing the screen?
Yeah, I was having trouble unmuting myself.
Oh,
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your time today. And well, Kevin basically covered it. So, but I will reiterate some of what he says with a little bit more detail and hopefully explain this effort in a way that you can understand it. So this rulemaking will be amendments to rules that set the standards and procedures that a city must follow to maintain a comprehensive plan and development codes that meet statewide planning goal 5 for wetlands. Wetlands are one of several goal 5 categories, and this rule would only be addressing the wetland portion of our goal 5 rules. And before I go into the slides here, I want to recognize that how a land use approach to wetland protection is different from state and federal removal fill laws that many of you might be familiar with. So removal fill laws, one, they don't regulate vegetation removal, and two, they are set up to allow wetlands to be filled provided mitigation is provided to maintain no net loss is what their standard is. Often that mitigation occurs at a reasonable distance, at a far distance from where the wetland functions were lost. And and the difference here from a land use perspective is that under Goal 5, what we want to do is identify high functioning wetlands and then keep those wetlands and their function in place by limiting the types of development that can damage the wetlands in the first place. So now on to the slide here. So Goal 5 works at the intersection and inherent conflict between preserving natural resource features that provide important environmental and social functions and allowing for new development. So the idea behind Goal 5 is that we flag the most important, or what we call locally significant, resource sites, and then we try to build around them. And the best time to employ this kind of strategy is before areas intended for urban development are rezoned to allow that development. So in the past, it was acceptable for cities to take some time developing long-range plans for new urban areas. But as Kevin mentioned, with the impetus on getting land available for housing development, one, we have an increased number of UGB amendments that are being proposed and adopted. And we've seen changed expectations for how quickly these new urban lands should be made available for housing development. So the proposed rulemaking would allow development to proceed in less environmentally sensitive portions of new urban land, while the city did the work needed to identify and protect locally significant wetlands. So identification of locally significant wetlands is achieved through local wetland inventories. So that's the heading of the slide here, local wetland inventories, which we will now refer to as LWIs. And LWIs must be approved by the Department of State Lands. So next slide, please. So for this slide, I'm going to take the second bullet first, I'm sorry. So periodic review is what we call a full review and update of a city's comprehensive plan and codes. Earlier in the history of the land use program, the idea was that periodic review would happen every few years. However, about 20 years ago, the legislature largely removed the requirement for periodic review, making this trigger, for all intents and purposes, moot when it comes to basically forcing an LWI to be completed or forcing the step to identify locally significant wetlands. And this is why you saw on the last slide where it said that only 1/3 of Oregon cities have completed citywide LWIs. And that's because the periodic review trigger was lost with changes to state statute. So what we're dealing with now is the requirement to apply Goal 5 at the time of a UGB amendment if there's evidence on the record of that amendment that there's a wetland, that wetlands exist in the area. So the applying Goal 5 basically means applying the rule specific to this resource category, the resource category, in this case, wetlands. And that work needs to be done before new uses are allowed that could affect the resource site. So before urban zoning is applied, often urban zoning that happens at the time of annexation. So this rule amendment would create a new option for addressing Goal 5 wetlands when a UGB amendment starts the ball rolling for having to comply with Goal 5. Next slide, please. So this is a kind of a graphic to show how things are done now. So we have the area identified circled in pink here is an area newly added to a city's UGB. And between the time that happens and urban and development occurs, the work needs to be done to identify local wetland inventories or to identify high functioning wetlands, which we call Goal 5 significant wetlands. And that work can take some time. Over the last several years, we've been seeing it take 2+ years to get an LWI completed and then approved by DSL. DSL is working at their end to try to shorten their review time. But with the increased number of UGB amendments that we're seeing, we can hope that DSL's efforts will be able to keep up with the new demand, but we still are concerned that the timeline for getting the field work done for an LWI and getting it approved by DSL could be on the order of 2 years. But once that is done, then that would allow, under the current rule, that's when the local jurisdiction could apply the zoning that would allow a development to occur in these new urban areas. So ideally, that because this order of operation happens, that this new development is not built on top of a high functioning wetland. And let me just check my notes here. And so I guess I just want to mention important functions that wetlands provide are flood storage, sediment filtration for stormwater, groundwater recharge, and often provide important wildlife habitat. So next slide, please. So the basic concept is for this rulemaking would be to allow urbanization to proceed while a full Goal 5 program is being developed. And so here, the city would require that impacts to all wetlands be avoided while the LWI is being produced, and then allow development to proceed in upland areas. So upland areas meaning non-wetland and non-riparian areas during that time, and then just continue to allow that pathway for development until the LWI is approved, the local wetland protection program is adopted, and then that would essentially remove any local restrictions on developing in non-significant wetlands. So essentially, with this option, if we created this new option, the city would obtain the same Goal 5 outcome, but through a slightly different pathway. And that's why we're looking at this as a technical fix as opposed to a change in policy. Next slide, please. So a little more detail here. So how would this work? Landowners and developers would be required to complete delineations, wetland delineations or determinations to determine wetland boundaries. And then, as said previously, then all development would only be allowed outside of those wetland boundaries. And one of the kind of nice things about this approach is that data collected through a delineation or a wetland determination can actually be used to populate a local wetland inventory. So that's not, they're not necessarily two separate, they're different approaches for learning about wetlands and where they are, but they overlap, and we can capitalize on that overlapping and make it so the data collected for a wetland delineation is utilized in the process of developing an LWI. So when we say avoidance, what we're thinking is that there'd be no structures or vegetation removal allowed in any wetland, except for utilities needed to serve upland areas. And this exception is something that we commonly see cities include in their local wetland protection program. So even where they're saying no development will occur in a locally significant wetland, they make an exception for utilities because it's important to make sure that upland areas are can be developed. Let me just check my notes. And that's it. And I think I'm done with my slides.
All right, so Amanda, I know I said, well, let's not take questions until the end, but we have a question in the chat, and this might be a good time to answer it. The question is, apologies in advance. Oh, it's not a dumb question. Does this have any impact on development outside of municipalities that are on county land?
No, it would not. And the reason is that the Goal 5 rule for wetlands does not require local wetland inventories outside of urban growth boundaries.
So I'm gonna put a little finer point on that, because within municipalities, there's areas within city limits. And so if we're talking strictly within city limits, yes, it applies there. There is some potential that you may have an UGB area that's not yet part of a city that would be subject to these rules, which would be currently under county jurisdiction, but ultimately planned for urbanization. I know that's a nuance, but that would be one wrinkle.
I'm curious, are there separate protections then for the wetlands that are not incorporated or not in a UGB?
From the land use side of things, the county has the option of adopting Goal 5 protections for wetlands, but they're not required to. They're not required to conduct a local wetland inventory. And I'm speaking here, I will just mention that we have wetlands on the coast, and coastal wetlands are covered more under our coastal management goals rather than Goal 5.
Right, I'll go ahead and proceed on, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So, so that's basically the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to accomplish. And this is our schedule. We're here today with you on September 5th, talk about our rulemaking advisory committee and our community engagement plan. On the 15th, we'll be talking to the local officials advisory committee, talking about the rule concept, our charter, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's all building up to initiation of rulemaking, which will ask our commission, Land Conservation and Development Commission, to initiate the rulemaking, giving us basically the green light on this effort. After that, we should be able to move quickly into sending out notice of this opportunity for folks to be engaged in the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. I'm sorry, this is an old slide. Never mind the notes on the left. I will talk about those in a moment. So for some reason, I pulled up an older version, so that's my mistake. Okay, so we will form the Rulemaking Advisory Committee then in December through February. We're anticipating holding 2 or 3 RAC meetings, at which point we'll have draft rule language, we'll review required impact statements. Thinking we will likely, I would say, have a webinar somewhere around the last week of January when we have a full set of rules that are out there for public comment. So we'll provide that opportunity for folks to better understand the rules and to provide comments as we're sort of honing in on what the right language is. Ultimately, April 1st is our drop dead date for Secretary of State's office, where we have to post that draft rule. Again, that's another public input opportunity. It's a legal requirement as well, in advance of our commission meeting, which we're looking at in April. So that would be the public hearing where public comment could be provided. And then we'll have a placeholder for a potential additional Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting in April, early May, depending on what kind of feedback we get from the commission, if there are issues we feel that we need to work through with our Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Then we'll have a close of public comment in early May. That allows us to look at all of the input we're getting, prepare that final draft of the rules, and then move forward with LCDC adoption in June of 2026. The other piece of this that we're also working on is a program we're referring to as DubTAP, or the Wetland Technical Advisory Program. So the department did receive $500,000 this biennium to support local government work on wetland planning. And we're excited about this program. We're anticipating using those funds for the development of local wetland inventories to assist local governments in developing Goal 5 programs, to also do potential wetland delineation and upland determination work. This will be happening kind of at the same time. It's for this biennium ending in the middle of 2027. And so the hope is that some of the work we're doing here with the rulemaking will ultimately benefit, some of these projects. So, if we have delineations, if we have LWIs that come out of it, they should be able to benefit from the change to the rules. I'll pause there. Jennifer, I see you came on screen. Did you have a question or no? Okay, I'll keep going then. So today, really would like to talk about our proposed RAC membership. And then if you have any comments on the community engagement plan, I haven't really prepared a presentation on that, but it's in your packet. And so I wanted to provide space if anyone had any input on that as well. In terms of the Rulemaking and Advisory Committee, again, we're looking at sort of a focused technical exercise. These rules are very complicated, as is wetland regulation, as you heard with the state and federal, and then there's the Goal 5 component that adds another layer. So first of all, tribal consultation on this will occur with other rulemaking efforts as part of that policy agenda review that you just heard about. And so if there is a desire for tribal engagement in the rulemaking, we're absolutely making space on our Rulemaking Advisory Committee for that. As well as we're looking for folks from local governments, councils of government staff with experience and knowledge of Goal 5 wetland issues. Again, these are pretty complicated things. So sometimes those councils of government will have folks who specialize in this kind of work. And those are the folks we'd like to hear from on this, as well as wetland consultants, League of Oregon Cities as folks who are advocates for all Oregon cities. Metro Title 13 staff, that's making sure that our rules make sense for the Portland metro area. Title 13 is their implementation of their natural features program, as well as making space for environmental advocates and of course housing advocates or interests. So that's our group there. And let's see, I guess that's it. So I'm the kind of the lead contact on this. So my contact information is here, and I can leave this slideshow with Sadie if there's any follow-up. But I want to provide an opportunity to answer any questions y'all might have at this time. And I'll go ahead and stop share so we can see each other.
Thank you, Kevin and Amanda, for the presentation. I'll say from City of Eugene's perspective, I think we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of this, and definitely see kind of the opportunity to make this process a little bit more smooth. We're looking at a UGB expansion in the next few years, given our significant housing needs. So a lot of our urban reserves have wetlands on them. So this will be definitely beneficial I hope it will be beneficial for a lot of local governments. I don't have any comments on your RAC list. I think you've emphasized that this is a pretty technical, pretty narrow scope. And so I think keeping the RAC itself fairly technical and narrow makes sense. I did want to ask a question or share a comment maybe on the community engagement and communications plan. I think, and I kind of brought this up with the coastal area rulemaking as well, but I think there's an interesting tension in the way we talk about doing engagement on this topic. And there's a few statements in the plan around, listening first and leading with questions, not answers. Collaboratively developing solutions and being clear about where input has influenced the process, that I think are all good things. And when you have a very narrow technical scope, there's a tension there, I think, in how much you are truly like leading with questions and looking for kind of big picture, I guess, collaborative solutions. It seems to me that this is really like staff are presenting kind of a technical path based on your knowledge, based on what you've seen in past UGB expansions or other wetland inventory work. And you're really looking for the rulemaking committee to vet and refine versus develop new ideas and solutions about how we balance wetlands and housing and things like that. So I think if my understanding is correct, that this really is a more technical path, just being upfront about that in your communications, I think it's fine, right? Like, this is narrow. We're going to stay kind of narrow in our engagement, and 2 RAC meetings isn't a lot of time to get super deep and way bigger existential questions around housing and how we weigh natural resources versus housing development or other development. So I would just think about some of that language and see if it really aligns with kind of this more technical, narrow approach you're taking. But overall, I think it's great. It's exciting. I'll be curious to hear what other CIC members think. Sarah, go ahead.
Totally agree with everything you just commented, Leah, for sure. The only comment I had around the RAC body and looking at it was, I know that there are a lot of smaller and Eastern Oregon cities who are part of the League of Oregon Cities, but I think sometimes they still can get a little drowned out if that's kind of the representation that we're looking at. And I would just wonder if it wouldn't be okay to just add to that list either like east of the Cascades representation from a municipality or something like that specifically.
Great
you for
idea.
that. No, I do appreciate that. And there are a few local governments we know have had issues with this in particular in recent years. And I think we will be reaching out to those folks, and because we want to hear their perspective, how can we make this work better for y'all? But the regional focus is I mean, also much appreciated. I will say, I've understood from Amanda, there's generally less wetlands on the dry side. That said, it's not like they're non-existent. So I think that input is valuable. Thank you.
Can I chime in here a bit to Lee, with your comment and our presentation of this as being very technical, and I don't want it to I want to say that we're not settled on everything yet. We will need some assistance, in particular our questions about the transition from what we're thinking of as an interim approach to the final full Goal 5 program, and whether that's something that's set by a time clock or an indefinite timeline or something else that that the rule prescribes moving from the interim to the final program. That's one of the main things that we need help with. We need help figuring out.
Are there questions or comments from CIC members? Okay. Sadie, you have anything else on this topic? You look like you're ready to say something.
No, I was just noticing that we are back on track with our agenda, and I think if we are finished with our wetlands rulemaking presentation, that we can move on to roundtable and maybe next steps. If that is the will of the group. Trying to think, I don't have a lot for roundtable. I will mention I've been closely involved with the offshore wind roadmap development, and had the opportunity to participate in some of the focus groups for that work, and just so impressed by the contributions of our, and observations shared in those focus groups. And I'm really learning a lot, and I'm very optimistic about what we can produce in terms of recommendations for the legislature that could result eventually. So for kind of like to expose it to this group, when we are finished with developing the Oregon offshore wind energy roadmap, it will move in a recommendations report to the legislature, at which point, and this is the same path that the ONA rulemaking took. It started with a report and a group of recommendations to the legislature, and then the legislature considered those recommendations and said, okay, let's move forward with rulemaking in these spaces, and they directed DLCD through legislation to do that. So offshore wind is on a similar path. When this recommendations report is delivered to the legislature, they at that point will then have the opportunity to consider those recommendations based on the, the community feedback and the roundtable, the roadmap roundtable conversations and outcomes, and say, okay, we would like DLCD to update state laws in the following areas. So I just want to reassure the group that we are doing a really robust and thorough job, I think, with our engagement in that area. We're very grateful for the extended timeline that you heard about in the policy agenda, that gives us a better window of time to do all of that and bring together our recommendations. But that's kind of it for what I would have to report on. If others have things they would like to share with the group, I'd love to hear what you all are up to or concerned about or excited about.
I will say, and of interest relevant to this group, I am very focused right now on the housing rulemaking that's going on at the state level and following that. For those who are not intimately involved or haven't heard that much about it from the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, or talked about it a little bit today, but the LCD is wrapping up kind of part 2 of this multi-year rulemaking, and we'll be bringing forward new rules for housing planning to the commission for adoption by their December meeting. And the rules pretty fundamentally change how local governments plan for housing needs and how they accommodate that within their land supply, within our urban growth boundaries, and through, taking action to facilitate the production of more housing, the affordability of that housing, and ensuring that the housing meets the needs of all community members and furthers fair housing choice. So there's pretty fundamental changes to the statewide planning program happening through that rulemaking. Would encourage folks to tune in if you haven't been there. I think the public hearing on that set of rules is at the October LCDC meeting, and Ingrid or Sadie, you can correct me on that if I'm misremembering, but that's where I'm spending a lot of my time right now, is trying to figure out how that influences our work plan in Eugene as we look towards adopting new housing planning materials next year, or 2027, I should say. And then looking forward to a UGB expansion in the next following years, given how significant our housing need is locally. So it's a wild ride to try and keep track of it all, and Ingrid, I know, is deep in it. It's been a pretty intensive rulemaking session for the state. So yeah, that's where my brain is. Curious what other folks, if anyone else has anything to share, things you're working on or focused on or interested in right now.
I'll jump in and share some thoughts. So, yeah, this was a really helpful meeting to hear all the different rulemaking efforts being undertaken by DLCD. And they're like, wow, you're covering a lot. And I appreciate the CAC opportunity to provide some feedback on entities to engage in, and I think just want to share a feedback for staff that you all are maybe the lack of suggestions or comments is a sign that you all are doing it really well, I think, in covering a lot of the bases. So kudos to you all for doing that. And I just want to share a anecdote about the state we're in with housing needs and affordability, the statewide planning program, and community engagement. And I was quite bummed to see that the Goal 1 modernization did not pass. Definitely understand the budget situation we're in, especially with lack of federal funds coming in and the legislature needing to shift funds around. I hope that our committee, the agency, and the legislative body doesn't lose sight of the value and, in my opinion, need of updating Goal 1. There's just so many different ways, speaking from a perspective of a former planner. Yeah, we could do a lot to modernize Goal 1, and I'm interested in this committee to advance or support that update however we can. And then the last thing I'll share in terms of next steps, it sounds like the next meeting we will have is with LCDC in February. So seeing Sadie nod to that, I will just offer that I'm available and interested to have any sort of subcommittee meeting to prepare for that. So yeah, let me know if I can be of assistance in preparing for it. It feels like 5 months. It is 5 months between now and then. So yeah, if there's any appropriate touch points, I think it would be worthwhile for Ingrid and Sadie to reach out and get feedback from us.
Thank you, Zachariah.
Any other comments, info shares in our last few minutes here?
I can go really quickly. Sorry, I joined late and I know I'm new, so didn't have any comments today just because I'm getting used to the role of this committee and just here to soak in all the information and learn, but happy to be here and yeah, very impressed by the presentations by staff today. Great job and appreciate all the information and all the work that DLCD staff are doing.
Thanks, Megan. Welcome. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments for the good of the order? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I know we've got a few new members, so appreciate you all taking the time to just absorb all this information. And of course, thanks for always feel free to share your thoughts with staff after the meeting as you have time to kind of absorb and sit with it. Thank you, Jennifer, Zachariah, and Stefan for being willing to help out with the panel for February. I'm looking forward to that and happy to weigh in on key questions or other topics that come out of that group for sure, via email or otherwise. So thank you all. Just a reminder, if you've got comments on the policy agenda, now is the time. September is your time. And so feel free to share those with staff otherwise. So thank you all for being here this morning. I know these are long meetings, so we got through it, getting you out of here just 2 minutes early.
We had high hopes at the top of this
I know,
thing.
I thought we
don't
were
know
gonna
what
do that
happened.
for this. Thank you all and have a great weekend. Enjoy the last bits of summer here before the fall really gets going. So have a good rest of your Friday.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Take
y'all.
care.
Bye.
Bye.